going on, crypto people? It is the Crypto Siege with another day in the life and the crazy life that is the digital asset space. Guys, listen, Brad Garlinghouse lays it down in this most recent, and I'm telling you, this is an epic interview. I mean, it's a tell-all interview, in my humble opinion, and I believe that this roadshow, if you will, that Stu Alvarado and Brad Garlinghouse are putting on is genius in motion. You want to take a listen to this, listen very, very carefully. Don't miss a second of this, because I think this really spells out where we are in this SEC versus Ripple case and the very likely outcome of a settlement that is going to change the digital asset space big time. Check it out.
So you've been in a very high-profile legal battle with the SEC for almost 2 years. Both sides have now asked a federal judge to make a call on whether XRP is indeed a security that falls under the purview of the SEC. My question to you is, why now, and why are you foregoing the right to go through a trial and present more evidence? Why are you so sure that everything is already out there?
So trial.
Oh, you know what? And before I do that, shout out to this guy, 801_XRP. Thanks for sharing this, bro. This is some really great stuff. Thanks again. We appreciate you.
Are really reserved for like when there's a question of fact. And so juries and judges are like, what are the actual facts? In this case, the facts are pretty clear. The question is about the law. And we think the law is clear, and that the law requires, and the statute as written by Congress, the law requires that there's an investment contract. That's step one. Before you even get to the Howey test, which is often talked about, you have to have a contract between two parties. We don't even think we get past that step, because an investment contract, if you don't have an investment contract, you certainly don't have a security, because there's no agreement, period. If you get to the Howey test, then it's also a question of law. So we think this step of summary judgment is, first of all, the fastest path to resolution. We have been pushing very hard to move this quickly, partly because we think the law is clear, and partly because we think the whole industry needs the clarity we're seeking.
Yeah, and I definitely want to come back to the broader implications for the crypto industry. But on that point of an investment contract, the SEC has made the case in its motion that that there can be an investment contract without a contract, any rights granted to the purchaser and without any obligations to the issuer. What do you say to that?
In order to have a contract, you have two parties. No matter how the SEC wants to spin the facts, the reality is, to have a contract, you have two parties have to agree on something. You don't necessarily have it written. You can have oral contracts, you can have implicit contracts, but you have to have two parties. The reality is there are not two parties. Ripple doesn't know who bought the XRP. The people who bought the XRP don't necessarily know Ripple. You have to remember that 99.9% of XRP trading has nothing to do with Ripple, the company. So when you talk about, okay, XRP is a security, I go back to something I said years ago when this started. A security of what company? Of what, like, who is the owner? So I think it's very clear there is no investment contract. If you get past the investment contract, which I think is hard, across the Howey test, you also don't have, you have to meet all three prongs. And in the case of the XRP case, you can't meet all three prongs for sure. And so we think that the judge will see that the law is very clear. We think the facts are very clear. And we think this is just a gross overreach of the SEC trying to wrest control of that uncertainty that has existed. And really the unfortunate thing is the SEC and really the US government hasn't taken this step to provide that clarity that a lot of other countries around the world have.
I mean, for years you've spoken about the fact that lack of regulatory clarity in the U.S. Stands in stark comparison to Switzerland or Singapore. And so we have made steps since you first made that comment. The White House on Friday released a new framework for crypto regulation. But again, it's not hard and fast rules. Like, there are like competing bills on Capitol Hill, but nothing has been passed yet. So, I mean, do you still feel that there is just a very amorphous space in terms of regulatory clarity in the U.S.?
I do, and I think that the vast majority of people I know in the crypto industry, they want to follow the rules of the road, but we need to provide clarity on what the rules of the road are here in the United States. Ripple, frankly, will hire north of 300 people this year, and we'll do more of that outside the United States, and our growth is 95% from customers outside the United States, and it's partly because the rules of the road are clear in those countries. Way back when I first got involved with technology in the late 90s, the government took the step to clarify what are the rules of the road for the internet. And all kinds of capital flowed in, all kinds of entrepreneurs flowed in, and we saw an amazing explosion of activity and innovation, and that's amazing. And frankly, the US has benefited massively on a geopolitical basis from that. We haven't done that work here, and instead, particularly the SEC, is trying to regulate through enforcement.
Yeah.
that's a super inefficient way to do this, as opposed to let's do the work, let's provide the clarity. And I think the executive order is an example of taking that step. And I think that, as you mentioned, the bills pending and that have been introduced, we'll see where they go, one in the House, one in the Senate, I think are positive steps in that direction.
I mean, that buzz phrase of regulation by enforcement is something that a lot of people have been talking about with respect to the SEC stepping in and making rules just by virtue of retroactively holding people accountable for things that they didn't realize were a mistake in the first place or were an issue in the first place. So a lot of people are looking to this lawsuit between Ripple and SEC as a moment of setting precedent for the wider industry. Walk us through what that looks like based off of like the hypotheticals of either of how the judge rules.
Well, so I do think, as you say, I think it's a pretty bellwether case at this point. And we talked about, the Howey test is this Orange Grove Supreme Court case from the 40s. I think that the Ripple test may be what we look at in the future. And there are a lot of facts and circumstances that can be unique. But for Ripple and what the SEC is trying to do, I do think it's just the SEC trying to overreach the statute. And again, Congress gives the SEC power. The SEC can't just go take power. Congress has to pass laws that say, here's the framework. And in this case, what we're really talking about is the 1933 Securities Act, which created the SEC, which said if there's an investment contract, later on the Howey test. Look, we are very confident, as evidenced by the fact we filed summary judgment. We think, again, the facts are clear. We think the law is on our side, so we want to get to that resolution. But I do think it's important for the whole industry, because if the SEC is going to be the regulator of all crypto, and again, Gary Gensler, the current chairman of the SEC, has said he views virtually all crypto as a security. That's really going to change crypto in the United States, which is the largest economy in the world. I think we all should care that we're able to continue to innovate on these technologies and build solutions using these technologies that really can make the economy more efficient.
And so, looking at either side of how this ruling may turn out, I mean, if the judge rules with the SEC and deems XRP a security, what does that mean for the larger industry?
Well, I mean, for Ripple, I think for Ripple, we're already operating in a world. It's almost as if we have lost the lawsuit, simply because you don't have XRP trading here in the United States for all intents and purposes. Uphold is one exchange, still allows trading of XRP, but other than that, everyone else halted trading here in the US. So I think if we prevail, we'll now have more liquidity in the XRP ecosystem in the largest economy in the world. We think that's good for everybody. It also, I think, really sets a tone for other cases the SEC is pursuing now. And they've been quite aggressive, as I think has been kind of well reported in their kind of overreach and some of the letters that have gone out, that even congressional leaders have reached out to the SEC asking for explanation. If it doesn't go Ripple's way, I think Ripple can continue to grow our business. It'll just be largely a non-US business, which would be unfortunate. And I think it would give the SEC more standing to be more aggressive in other cases.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about Ripple's future if it does fall that way. But before we do, in terms of industry-wide precedent that might be set, so far the SEC has really only partitioned off Bitcoin and perhaps Ether as falling under the purview of the CFTC. You this week met with Caroline Pham, who's one of the commissioners of the CFTC. What did you guys talk about?
Well, I think Commissioner Pham's learning. I think she's very bright, still, relatively new to her position, and I think trying to learn. And I think she has spoken out about the need for the clarity that we have been seeking. And so, even what you're describing, the SEC Chair Gensler has said he won't comment on specific projects. He does comment on Bitcoin, which is a specific project. When asked directly about ETH, despite the previous administration, they viewed ETH to have been a security, then transitioned to a non-security. You now have the SEC making noises that perhaps ETH is indeed a security, and even in a recent legal filing not related to Ripple, they made the assertion that because most ETH nodes are based geographically in the United States, that they have jurisdiction to regulate ETH. So look, I do think at the core we have to go back to what is the law? What is the statute that Congress wrote to give the SEC power? And in this case, I think the SEC has greatly overstepped, and not just in this case, but what we're seeing with ETH. Gary Gensler also likes to say, that the rules are clear, but then you ask him, well, is ETH a security? He won't answer. Well, if they're that clear, let's provide the clarity that everyone's seeking. And I think it's just been really kind of frustrating and disingenuous.
Now, the implications for Ripple, you had mentioned that perhaps the company would leave the U.S., like you're based in San Francisco right now. How realistic a scenario is that in the aftermath of this ruling?
Well, look, we already have our second largest office today is London. We have a large office in Singapore. We have offices in Sao Paulo, Mumbai. So I view, it's a very global business to begin with. I mentioned earlier, 95% of our customers are non-U.S., and that certainly has continued to be the case during the lawsuit here in the U.S. So I don't think it's going to change our business much, depending upon how it plays out. We have had, almost growing 10x year on year in terms of volumes across what we call RippleNet, and that's in the middle of the lawsuit. So I do think about this a lot in context of what does it mean for the U.S. crypto industry? How do we think about blockchain growing and thriving here domestically? And I think as a U.S. citizen, I care, and I think it's important for us to be competitive to have that clarity.
When people think about the SEC versus the CFTC in terms of being the regulator of crypto, the SEC is typically seen as being stricter and kind of harder in their stance on digital assets. CFTC a bit softer. Does that stereotype bear out?
Well, I would characterize the SEC has built a reputation I think is deserved as being a bully. Many players that the SEC has gone after, they simply have to fold their cards. I mean, Ripple will spend well over $100 million defending ourselves in a case that we have tried to move forward as quickly as we can, and the SEC has gone as slowly as they can. Another example I think is pretty profound. There's a kind of infamous speech that Bill Hinman, the director of corporate finance in the SEC, gave in June of 2018 saying, ETH is not a security. And the judge 5 times in the last 18 months, the judge in our case, she has ordered the SEC to turn over the notes in that case 5 times. We still don't have those notes. And I look at that as like the SEC, it is a government agency. The government works for the people. The judge is ordering the SEC to turn these notes over, and they won't do it, and they keep coming up with new reasons why. So much so that the judge, in her most recent ruling, said the SEC is being hypocritical, and I will quote, saying, not following a faithful allegiance to the law. These are damning words for an agency whose mission is stated as to protect investors. In the case of the the Ripple lawsuit, they destroyed $15 billion of value in the XRP market when they filed the lawsuit. That was not protecting investors.
I want to come back to this idea of regulation at a higher level. So getting some sort of hard and fast marching orders from Washington. How confident are you that we're going to see any sort of appreciable progression on this front in the next year?
I'm actually reasonably optimistic. I mean, if anything, the more aggressive the SEC has gotten and the more broad, the more you're seeing more and more people, the constituents, call their congressional leaders and say, we need Congress to act because the SEC is kind of running amok, and it's really driving the competitiveness of the United States and hiring. I mentioned earlier, we're going to hire roughly 300 plus people this year. We're trying to make sure more than half of those are outside the United States. That's partly because of this lack of certainty. That's not good for the U.S. So I think you're seeing more and more congressional leaders step forward. I think it's why you do now have a bill pending in the House. You have a bill pending in the Senate as well. And I'm hopeful that as they start having hearings about those bills, you'll start to get traction and people realize how important this is to the United States. So
your lawsuit is in the Southern District of New York. That district is also overseeing 3 major crypto bankruptcy, Voyager, Celsius, and 3 Arrows. And it's almost as though these bankruptcy judges and then your judge in this lawsuit are going to be deciding and setting precedent for the industry more broadly. What are your thoughts on the Southern District of New York, that legal jurisdiction becoming such a big voice in terms of crypto regulation going forward?
Well, I'll go back to what I said earlier. It's somewhat unfortunate we're relying on the courts to provide the clarity that we have government agencies who should be doing that work, whether it's the legislature or through rulemaking. There's a rulemaking process and to me, that's the hard work that we should have been doing. That frankly, other leading economies like the UK, you mentioned Switzerland and Singapore earlier. That's the kind of work we should be doing. I also will say, I don't know a lot of the specifics in some of those cases, but isn't it interesting we are spending so much energy from the SEC to pursue a case about whether or not XRP is a security when we have actual frauds occurring underneath their noses, actual bad actions that the SEC wasn't spending time on. And I think that's just really unfortunate and indicative of, look, if the SEC steps back and takes stock of their mission to protect investors, one of their missions, and I think they've kind of lost sight of what is their role here and how are they adding value and really creating a better environment, a more successful environment, more efficient environment for the U.S. to be competitive in these technologies.
So you told CNBC in May that Ripple might think about going public after you get a ruling on this SEC lawsuit. A lot has changed since then in the crypto landscape. What are your thoughts on that now?
Look, you're right. A lot has changed in the crypto landscape. That is not really true for Ripple. We had a record Q2. We continue to grow, signing up more customers. Volume. We publicly shared that volume on RippleNet grew around 10x year on year through our core product called on-demand liquidity. And so I remain very optimistic about the future of Ripple. And I think once we get past this, accessing the public markets is, I think, the right next step to kind of growing our business. But we want to get through the SEC, provide that clarity, and get closure on the pending lawsuit.
And last month there was a headline that Ripple is also potentially looking at buying some of the assets belonging to Celsius. Where does that stand, and are you at all considering buying the business outright?
Well, we are in a very strong position. We have a very strong balance sheet. I think we've publicly shared we have about $1 billion of cash on the balance sheet. And so we certainly look at these cycles that the crypto markets have gone through as opportunities. This is really the third downturn crypto winter that I have been around Ripple for, and each time Ripple has kind of emerged stronger. And so we look at it as an opportunity to continue to grow and make sure we're solving customer problems, make sure the customers who are already dependent upon us can depend upon us for more things potentially. So we'll continue to look at opportunities, and some of the assets we see around are priced differently today than they were 6 months ago.
Right, and so we are in the midst of this crypto winter. We've seen a lot of layoffs with other crypto firms. Where do you see us headed from here? Like it's definitely been a tighter time horizon in terms of coming out of these bearish moments for the market. Do you think that we're looking at emerging from this in the next 6 months, or do we have a while to go?
Look, I tweeted publicly, you never want to see the industry go through this, and the layoffs are painful. I think it does let people step back and really focus on building. People talk about it as crypto winter. It's like, well, it's crypto building time. It's the season to actually make sure you're solving a problem. In Q2, when a lot of these companies were doing layoffs, Ripple added over 100 new positions. We hired over 100 people in Q2. So it's very hard to predict, when these gyrations come and go, and I give the counsel internally at Ripple of take the long view, and Ripple's always taken that long view of let's make sure we're solving a customer problem, let's make sure we're delivering utility using these technologies. And the reason why we use XRP is because it is the most efficient for payments. It is extremely fast, extremely low cost, and it works really, really well for cross-border.
All right, guys, so that is just wow. So that's some really, really great stuff. That is some really, really great stuff for sure, guys. Very, 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 very telling. Shout out to Brad Garlinghouse, Stuart Alirati. Again, genius in motion with this road show for sure. $1 billion of cash on the books, guys. And he's intimated in a couple of things. They're going to become stronger after this crypto, if you will, winter or building time. And with $1 billion in cash, look, and buying things on the cheap, they're going to be in a position. Rumor on the street in reference to Celsius Network. Well, let me say this first. I thought it was very telling that Brad Garlinghouse brought up what we brought up on this channel before, when Senator, I think it was Senator Toomey brought up as well, and Celsius and Three Arrows Capital and Voyager. Where was the SEC? They're going after Ripple for non-criminal charges, non-criminal charges, costing over $100 million for Ripple. They're spending all this taxpayer money to pursue this case for, I think, over a year now, it looks like, right? No fraud, no criminal charges. No fraud, no criminal charges. But yeah, there's fraud and these other things allegedly, right, from a bunch of other regulators, state regulators, and the SEC is nowhere to be found. And that's exactly what Senator Toomey said. Senator Toomey said in the Celsius case, Voyager case, where was the SEC? This particular agency that's supposed to be protecting investors. Well, listen, guys, this wraps up the XRP Ripple Daily News in around 0 to 10 minutes. I hope it has been of value to you. If it has, do me a favor, hit that like button and hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. So do you know whenever we go live or when we do upload a video? I'm going to end this one like I do all my videos and remind you guys of this. Old money doesn't want you to win. They don't want us to win. They would rather that we remain a cog in their perpetual wheel of trading our time for dollars. They don't want us to play in the same playground that they play in, where we allow our money to work for us. This is our chance to win, guys. The digital asset space is our chance to win. We are in the midst of the greatest transfer of wealth in the history of man. Are you participating, or are you standing on the sidelines? Here's what I do know, that the battle for you has already been fought, and the victory is yours. Go get it.